Welcome to the Money Over 50 podcast, brought to you by Dallas Davison and Michael Hogue from Money Over 50 Financial Advisors. This information is general in nature and does not take into account your objectives, financial situation, or needs. Therefore, you should consider whether the information is appropriate for you and your personal circumstances. If you require personal advice, please contact Money Over 50 Financial Advisors. Here are your hosts, Dallas Davison and Michael Hogue.
Welcome to Money Over 50 with Dallas and Michael. The best way to avoid panicking in a market downturn is just don't panic. Dallas.
Thanks, Michael. This is a thesis that I've come across in many different areas of my life. I think there's culturally, now I'm going to do the thing where I step right back and talk about the evolution of our culture. So I think one of the things that in our modern world that we do much more than previously is to talk about our feelings and to, talk about the emotional state of what we're going through and what we're experiencing, which is all positive in many ways. The danger, though, is that we end up talking about these emotions and about these feelings as though it's something that's sort of, it's out of our control whether we then act on them or not. And so what I'm talking about here is I've read so many times in all sorts of different financial planning literature about, talking about how to design a portfolio for a client in a way that, in a way that stops them from panicking, or that, how to communicate, how to talk to your client in a downturn to stop them from panicking. Like there's all this sort of, and I didn't realize this until I thought about it in other aspects of my life. It's sort of implied as though the person who actually has the retirement savings, as though the client or as though the individual is some sort of dumb animal that's, I don't know, getting a fright and running like a bolting horse, you know what I mean, that doesn't have any powers of reason. And so I think that the first step, I'll explain the other experiences but we talk about this as, throughout many of these podcasts, we've talked about, okay, well, for most people, you have to own companies throughout your retirement. That's just the fact that you have to do that in order to get the rate of return that you need, in order to live the lifestyle you want. How do we make sure that you don't panic? And, there's a lot of education around that and understanding of what it is we're actually invested into and why we need to be invested in all that. And that's all really valuable and really useful. But there's also a component where we just have to make a commitment as the person with that money invested. We just have to make a commitment to ourselves that we will not panic, and then act on that commitment to ourselves. We've reasoned our way into it. We know why we need to hold what we need to hold. We know that that's going to come with those downturns. We just need to make a commitment to just basically toughen up and not panic and not react based on that fear or on that emotional state that we're going through at that point in time. Does that make any sense at all?
Absolutely. So what we need to remember is a couple of things for me that stand out. Number one, when markets fall, all that is that the offer to purchase the great quality companies that you own, it's someone offering you less than what you would otherwise expect.
Yes. This
is no different to having $1 million house and someone knocking on your front door and saying, I'll give you $500,000 for it. Yep. You'd slam the door in their face. Yeah, you'd laugh.
It wouldn't instill panic in that way.
It wouldn't instill panic. You'd be hardly tempted to take their offer.
Yeah. Now part two of that, though.
That's what it is. This is what it is.
But I think it's a really interesting one too, because part two of that is that if that did instill panic. So if, for example, you went, oh, geez, the house next door, the neighbour next door to me has panicked and sold his house, and he's sold it for $500,000. Geez, my house that was worth $1 million, it's now worth, like, that's the most recent market valuation of that house. It's worth $500,000. That feels really unpleasant. I don't like that. That causes some panic, some stress, some hysteria. Now, that's part one of it. Part two of it is that's fine. You're allowed to experience all those things. You're allowed to go through those emotional states. What you can't then do is ring up old mate who bought the house next door and say, you know what, I'm feeling really emotional and I'm feeling really, in a state of sort of hysteria, now's a good time for me to make big decisions. I'm gonna act on this. So not only am I experiencing it, we could argue about whether you should experience it or not. That's, I think, outside the realm of, for most people, you are going to experience that panic. Part two of that is don't then pick up the phone. Don't ring the guy who's buying houses at $500,000 and say, hey, I've got this house that I thought was worth $1 million, but geez, I don't know, I'm really stressed out at the moment, so can I please sell it to you for $500,000? Just don't do that. Just sit there and panic at home on your own. Just don't pick up the phone. It's not that hard in some ways. Now, separate to this, there's all sorts of retirement planning things around. You do have to draw an income from somewhere, and so there's a financial planning issue around not having to sell assets in a downturn. But I think that this is a big thing for people, and this is...
Well, all that comes back to, for me, is buy when you have the money.
Yeah.
And sell when you need the money.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So if you're retired during a downturn, and you no longer are getting dressed and going to work yourself, and so you're getting dressed still.
But you need $6,000 that month.
You need the money to live for that month.
Yeah. You sell those shares.
You sell those companies at that point in time.
Yep.
Not forgetting that there's also a dividend element that's getting paid to you even during a downturn.
And also disregarding that you probably have a small allocation to cash that you could draw from.
You can draw from all of that. Just simply, when you need the money, that's when you sell.
Yes.
And when you... So what we're talking about here is different.
Yep.
You're talking about...
Blind panic.
You don't need the money.
Yep.
And you're volunteering to great quality companies of Australia and the world.
Yep.
You're volunteering to sell them at half price.
Yes. Yep.
So this is what we're talking about.
Yeah.
And what you're saying is, don't do that.
Yes. Yeah.
And I
think that
I strengthen that. Don't do that.
There's a really interesting one that I think an analogy, or the analogy that got me thinking about this is the you'll remember one of our previous podcasts called "Do or Do Not, There Is No Try." It's the same concept. So the phrase that I read recently, if you want to be tougher, be tougher.
Yeah.
Like, you can't talk your way into it. You can't think your way into being either tougher or more disciplined or more whatever phrasing you want to use there. So a couple of stories that I have of this. One that paints me in a positive light. So then I'll tell another one that paints someone else in a positive light. But when I was doing a lot of training for MMA and having a few fights, I talked to a lot of, there was a fair element of sacrifice and pretty much torture to some degree. You'd have to train for 3 hours a day on next to no food to cut weight to get to this point. To me, it was bizarre because I talked to a lot of people in the gym who would say things like, I'd like to do that. I'd like to do that, but I couldn't cut that weight, or I couldn't eat that diet, or I couldn't do those hours of training. And it kind of really annoyed me because it always sort of implied that there are just people who can do this, and then there's not, and it sort of implies that it wasn't painful for me. I'm going, and when people used to say that, it used to really annoy me because I'd be going, I'm not feeling hungry. This isn't the thing where I've got some amazing metabolism where I can eat a plate of spinach once a day and train for 3 hours and suddenly feel great and feel really happy about it. It was torture the whole way through. It was just that I'd made a choice that was the thing that I was going to do, and so I was going to do it in spite of the pain, and in spite of the emotional state that I was in spite of what I felt about it. I was just going to do it anyway, and so that was always an interesting one to me because those people who talked to me about it in that way, they said that they wanted to do these things. I want to do this. I want to do that. They will never do that, and they can't ever do that because they couldn't fathom the concept that it wasn't about not feeling it. It was about not acting on that feeling, and it was about pushing through that feeling. And I think that's exactly what we're talking about here, is that people talk about not panicking in a downturn as though there's some way that you can be invested, or that there's some amazing phrase that your advisor can use that talks you out of it at the moment when you want to panic and sell, as though you're not going to experience those feelings. And so maybe it's good news, maybe it's bad news. If you're sitting there thinking I'm worried that I would panic in a downturn. How do I stop from feeling like that? You can't. You're not going to stop yourself feeling like that.
You can't. And there's three words that we have said before and we'll say again, which are don't do that.
Yep.
Like so it's as simple as that.
Yeah. You just
don't do that.
Yep. Yep.
Do not sell.
Yep.
Do not panic.
Yep.
Do not. It's not to say that you shouldn't be you might not be feeling unease and things like that.
It's the three most valuable words in financial planning, both in terms of those things, but we use other examples of things where our emotions are working against us. People who are, who have told you that they need to put this much money into super every year to live the retirement they want, will then go, yeah, but I feel as though I want a boat. Well, you might feel as though you want a boat, but you cannot afford a boat, so don't do that. And that's it. That's the conversation ends there. It's not, I'm not going to sit there with that person and try and convince them that they shouldn't want a boat, because that's beyond my pay grade. That's probably a psychologist thing. I don't know who talks them in and out of that, but the facts are that you mustn't do that. Do not do that is all you can say, is all you have to say. And I think the same thing applies. We know that when it comes to sort of delayed gratification type things like that, when it comes to those negative emotions like panic or you're feeling really despondent because you've done all this work to build up your retirement savings and now it's dropped, you're experiencing this range of negative emotions and your instinct is to act on that. I can't tell you not to feel those things, and I'm not going to pretend that you're not going to. I can only tell you that the best way to handle those is not to act on that. The best way to not panic is to not panic. Is I guess the point there. Yeah, that's I think a thing where I said I'd tell two stories about that. The follow up story of that is I used to train with this other young guy that who. And his father was a bit of an amateur sports psychologist, and it was interesting because even me, who was training and was living that lifestyle, I remember one day we got talking about, doing rounds of sparring, and I made some comment about, do you ever try and burn him out a bit and try and really get him tired so that he can have that experience of the emotional state of being tired while we're sparring, because we just finished doing some rounds of. And they both sort of laughed and said, he woke up this morning at 4:00 and ran 10Ks, and then this afternoon he's done, this training and then this training, and now he's here sparring with you, who you don't know what you're doing. You're no real danger to him, but we are doing that right now. This isn't something where we're trying to avoid those negative emotional states. We're trying to dive into them. We're trying to go towards that and go. Of course, we need to practice experiencing that and practice doing the right thing under pressure. And I think that's the hard thing about how people react or how they act in a downturn. When you've bought shares in companies, in these great companies in Australia and around the world, and the price is temporarily down, you don't really get a trial run, if that makes sense. You don't get to have that. You don't get to put yourself under that pressure. Other than when the time actually comes when you need to make the right decision. And so I don't think there's anything more useful that we can say then, is that if we've explained anything in this podcast over the last 250 odd episodes, it should be, as it relates to our thesis on investing for your retirement, it's the nuts and bolts are that for most people, you need to have some exposure to companies. You need to be invested in companies. We know that companies are going to have periods of time where their value drops significantly, very quickly, and it's going to be very scary, and it's going to be unpleasant, and you're going to experience a range of emotions around that. And the third thing is you cannot act on that. The only way to not panic at that point in time is to not panic.
Thanks for listening.
Thank you for listening to the Money Over 50 podcast with Money Over 50 financial advisors. For more information and resources, visit the Money Over 50 website, mo50.com.au. We look forward to catching up again soon.